to that, but I haven't yet heard him, and tell me if you have, really articulate why he wants another 4 years in a way that's truly stirring and convincing.
No,
have you?
They're thinking about it.
Yeah.
But I agree. You have some, I would almost call it punditry, and I mean that as a compliment. $400 on the shirt. Actually, now that we're on this subject, one of the themes running through, especially Michelle Obama's story, is luxury. So there's a question about whether she should appear on the cover of Vogue. There's the story you tell where she's at a soup kitchen, and she's handing out things, and she's wearing $500 sneakers from France. Who buys $500 sneakers? I mean, what is that about? Does she have a genuine taste for luxury? Is it just something that's fun?
She says a couple of things. What she said to neighbors in Chicago when her husband was starting to become famous and she was starting to come to Washington is she would basically say, if I have to go, I'm getting a new dress out of it. And so I think that clothing is a compensatory pleasure, that, if she has to do this, this is one of the fun parts. I think it's armor. She has said, looking good gives me confidence to go out in public life. And also she is so aware of the power of an image in a way that I'm not even sure that her husband is. And she's highly attuned to both the pressures and the possibilities of being the first African-American First Lady. And, what she's up against is so big. When she had image problems in the 2008 campaign, and she was being caricatured as an angry black woman, the advisors did do a little image makeover on her, and the way one of them described it to me later is they said, we're just going to make her more like the mom on the Cosby Show. And the reason that the Obamas were so interesting in 2008 were all the ways they resisted political culture and all the reasons they wanted to do things their own way. There was once a Barack Obama who refused to wear the little American flag lapel pin all the time because he said, never in these words, this is kind of cheesy, right? That Barack Obama is, that was several versions ago.
Again, continuing with this theme of the insularity, which you mentioned, the rule that I think you said she had no new friends.
I think it belonged to both of them, but yes. And they established that rule in 2004 when he became famous, and then kind of reiterated it in the White House.
Is that a good rule, in your view?
Well, we see its benefits and its harm. On the one hand, they have this really close, nurturing group of friends from very similar backgrounds. African Americans from Chicago, very similar pattern, coming from working class families, all went to elite universities and did extremely well, and all these people ended up in Hyde Park or near it together and really bonded together. And on the one hand, they've had this marvelously protective function for the Obamas. I love hearing the descriptions of the Obamas around their friends because the Obamas are different, right? They let their guard down and they're relaxed and they're loose and they're funny and they say the things they can't say in public anymore. It does become an issue in the presidency because the group, and I interviewed lots of members of this group. First of all, they're really, they don't want to talk to the president about his job. They say that they only raise it when he does. And they have such a perfect understanding amongst each other, right? I mean, they're from these really special backgrounds, and they've had a unique set of life experiences, but it's almost like the understanding among that group is so perfect that they sometimes, as a journalist, when I've talked to them, it was almost like they couldn't believe that an outsider, could could understand them. And, and it does become an issue in the presidency that the president and the first lady are not reaching out a little bit more in Washington. One thing I found a little surprising is that they've never had the Clintons to dinner.
Do you think their spiritual lives are still healthy? Is there any religion in their spiritual lives? We should ask in this room. How do you evaluate that most serious of subject?
It's a great question because, religion, like marriage, is something that there's been kind of this contest about whether it's a public or private thing for them. When Barack Obama first ran for president, he really put his religiosity out there. I mean, June 2006, he's making this call to renewal speech and telling people that he's going to be the Democrat who can win over evangelicals. How's he going to do that? Well, he's going to write this book, and he's going to title it after a sermon by his pastor named Jeremiah Wright. And we all know what happened, how that story ends. And so religion is, after the Jeremiah Wright affair, something that the Obamas try to take back into the private sphere, something they discuss a little bit now, but not that much anymore. They won't want to showcase a Washington church that they're gonna join. And I guess a White House aide once said something that really stayed with me, and what he said was, once you put some part of your personal life, like your religiosity, out there for people, and what he meant is, when you kind of market it a little bit politically, can you ever take it back? Can you ever truly pull it back into the private sphere? And what is so interesting about what's happening now with the Obama marriage is that they're really putting it out in the public sphere, because the president's personal ratings are much higher than his ratings on, say, the handling of the economy. And one of the things that his advisors are resting 2012 on is the appeal, the Obama Union. And the Obamas have learned, how to go out there together in public and, do this kind of, public political performance together that has an authenticity, but is also designed, you saw the meeting in the Oval Office in this book where they discuss it, it's designed to earn votes. And so I think, I don't know that I can answer it definitively for them, but you're asking, I think, exactly the right question, which is, can something be shared with the world so totally and used for political gain, and then can you take it back and make it private, entirely private again? Some managerial problems that Rahm Emanuel has, he can be quite abusive, and that has a real effect in the White House. A lot of White House aides told me that there were things they just didn't come to Rahm on because they were worried that he would blow up at them. So it had kind of an inhibiting effect on him as a manager. Also in fairness, there was not a clear management structure where everybody reported exactly to him and then upwards. But the real stress comes around the time that Scott Brown wins that seat, because even though they squeaked healthcare through, the Obama presidency becomes less of like this forward legislative drive, and it becomes something else. And at the same time, the midterm elections are coming up, and that puts tremendous stress on the relationship, because Emanuel had been the chair of the DCCC, and his life's mission before he became chief of staff was getting Democrats in Congress, especially in these really kind of competitive districts, and keeping these people in Congress. And yet, in the presidency, you kind of have a different agenda. You've got to make members of Congress take really hard votes. So, for example, I mentioned immigration as a sore subject. One of the really sore subjects between them was that the president really wanted to push for immigration reform, even though there was no legislation on the table. And that was a really big problem for Emanuel in the summer of 2010, because he was acutely feeling these vulnerable Democrats Democrats, especially in border states. And so the relationship did eventually become quite complicated and quite strained. I mean, David Axelrod, even by the summer of 2010, felt that Rahm should leave. Interestingly, once Emanuel started to run for mayor of Chicago, the relationship improved. It was almost like the burdens and the strains of the relationships lifted somewhat.
I would just add that our long national nightmare of having a non-Jewish chief of staff is over. Several times. Going back to Josh Bolton.